again. My name is Philip Martin, and I am the co-owner of Philip Martin Gallery here in Los Angeles, and I'm delighted that you could join us today. Co-own the gallery with my wife, Portia Hine, and you might have had a chance to meet her either at the gallery or at the fairs. If you are in Los Angeles, you can come by the gallery. We are open by appointment, and I think everybody here in LA is moving to be closer to being open, but we have regular hours and you can certainly come by. All you need to do is set up an appointment. Our next show is Cedric Huckabee, and that opens on Saturday. I'm really excited about that. And we just closed our Sky Gladys show, which was exciting. And so today we're going to be talking with Pam Jorden and Katy Cowan. Pam and Jordan and Katy Cowan showed together at the gallery in a group show that was really fantastic. And we've done solo shows with both of them. And I'm really excited to hear today what they're working on and what they've recently done and things that they're thinking about. How are you guys doing today?
Great, thank you.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
Fantastic. Well, I think without further ado, let's get started. What are you guys thinking about? What's going on?
Well, we asked Philip to do this because actually when Pam had her show, was that in December or January?
January.
At the gallery. In January, I immediately just wanted to ask Pam some questions because I love her artwork and I was intrigued by some of the decisions that she was making in terms of things like how she was thinking about shape, how she considers light, her color palette, and just me, you know, as an artist, fellow artist and friend of Pam, just totally enthralled by what she was doing with paint, these pours. Just really captivating, but being almost sculptural in their actions. And I just wanted to ask Pam some questions. So we thought it might be fun to like have a dual conversation with Philip rather than Philip just talking to one of us or like a group of us. So that's why we came up with this conversation today. And we have some questions that we're going to ask one another. And I was just going to start it off because I asked Pam if she wanted to do this anyways, and thought that Philip, you know, could show the images and interject and add anything to the conversation. If that works.
Yeah, I love interjecting.
Cool. So my questions are written down, so I'm going to be looking down when I ask her these because I don't want to forget anything. So Pam and I spoke a little before this interview, and a few things came up in that conversation and in the writing of her press release for the show that Philip has up on the screen. That I would like to ask about. Firstly, Pam and I talked about framing in our recent conversation and how our current, mostly non-social lives at the moment frame what we do and how the architecture we live in frames what we see within that activity. I loved thinking about the literalness of this window in Pam's statement and how she, in fact, explodes that frame with her circular shape. Also through her euphoric use of color. So I'm curious how the chosen shape of a circle occurred when thinking about and depicting the window as a frame, as a painting. And I know this may seem like a sort of basic technical painter question, but I think there's something more complex going on with that decision. I'm curious if this kind of breaking the logic that was mentioned in the press release is what's going on, or if this is more of like a painterly engagement with the window as a frame, or if it's something else. So that was my first question. Okay.
Thank you so much, Katy, for inviting me and encouraging this conversation to carry along. I think we've talked a lot already, but it's really fun to continue. This show kind of came about as just a lot of things I was working on over this past year. And one painting in particular was a rectangular shaped painting that was inspired by a graffiti covered pane of glass in my studio. And I really decided I'd like to explore the way that the paint is kind of layering and to try to be inspired by that window, but also let the painting kind of move and evolve and change through the process. And so the title of the show, Window Prism Eyes, were kind of, I like how you kind of bring up this literalness because there's a direct in this particular painting, but there's also sometimes kind of allusions to pictorial things like landscape and atmospheres and sunsets. And so I suppose there's sort of a directness that I kind of think about myself, but I often wonder how I might kind of let those ideas kind of seep in the beginning stages of a painting, but then kind of change through process a lot too. So the circles are kind of a size that I've been working on a long time too, and they sort of feel kind of body scale to me, and maybe like my arm span, and so they don't directly relate to a window in a kind of pictorial sense either, but they feel kind of I don't know, almost like the scale of a window in a domestic space, or as I look at sunsets and kind of think about skies and views and the kind of looking outward experience of kind of being stuck at home. I mean, I think all those things kind of ended up inspiring ideas for these paintings. So that's a little rambling of a lot of ideas, but sort of how I began thinking about these. Yeah, so I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, definitely does.
Yeah. And so through our conversations, I think we have talked a lot about how we both engage with space and landscape and sort of being home, looking outwards from my point of view. But for you, you were also talking about how you're outside a lot and walking and hiking and being outside in nature. So I kind of wondered about how you talk about landscape in this kind of current direction you're taking with your work. And then this painting, I'm kind of ad-libbing some notes I have here, but this painting really spoke to me in a way, just because there's this obvious relationship to landscape with the horizontality, but also the way that you use the rope to kind of draw through that space and kind of travel across, and then the way that you paint into that space was really interesting to me, which you kind of talk about illusionistically and then materially. So it'd be fun to hear you talk a little bit more about that too.
Yeah, it was fun when Pam and I spoke on the phone, we were talking about, how we're framing our current social activity or our daily activities. And landscape has become a huge part of mine this past year. Throughout the years, whenever I'm making work, I feel like I'm always actually cataloging my daily or my social activities. So in the past, that has been like a combination of the foundry seeping in, or the classroom seeping in, or just my artistic world seeping in. But this year I haven't had that, as many people haven't. So I spent a lot of time outside and let the landscape become a big focus of my work, which I hadn't intended. It just, it happened to be what I was doing. And I happen to also live in a really beautiful place, thankfully. So being outside was not a problem. So I got interested in letting the ropes kind of depict the landscape metaphorically, so looking like the wind blowing around the landscape, things like cypress trees kind of seized in position, the water activity here on the coastlines. But in terms of the mark making, I think I got interested in landscape in that respect. Like, I've been outside a lot and I've gone to the same places a lot, and I'm still captivated by the landscape and observing how it can fluctuate, and how do you capture that as an artist or a painter. But it also became almost like redundant too. Like, a lot of the titling you'll see is things like, recently, is like days upon days, or suns pass, or that piece you mentioned that Philip first showed, called Again. Like, it's having a lot more time with something that I haven't had the same sort of time relationship with, but then showing this passage of time through things like landscape has been really interesting to me. And then just because you asked about disrupting this kind of reference to landscape with the rope, I something that I love about work, whether it's my current focus of landscape or something else, is like clashing the obvious reference of things like these ropes or this image Philip has up, which is like a rope in combination with a 2x4 or just a plywood board. So using these very literal materials, but letting them kind of ebb and flow out of illusion, out of these other associations, back to what the kind of literal reference actually is.
And of course, that sense of literalness being slightly offset, of course, by the fact that they're all cast in metal. So the rope's not
Yes.
a real rope, the 2x4 is not a real 2x4. They're all cast from those things in metal and painted and exist only post casting.
Yeah, so it's like kind of a weird looping confusion. What you're looking at and what the material is and what the reference is. I like that kind of like moving around and ricocheting.
How do you think about the painting or the paint application as a disruption in that piece too? Or I think we talked a little bit about that.
Yeah. In the piece that Philip has up right now?
Yeah.
Well, it's so when I'm painting, I'll approach paint in a few different ways, and I think this particular piece, which was just like a big 2x4 with a rope positioned to hold it up as a freestanding work, then cast in aluminum. Uh, it's a really hard dimension for me to work with, and I keep doing it. I'm like, I'm gonna cast a 2x4 or a really long awkward skinny board, and it's definitely the hardest painting problem for me. I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this thing? It's such a strange dimension. All I can really think to do is make it look like a 2x4. But then to try and for in this instance depict some sort of fluctuating landscape that the viewer could actually transport to that other reference beyond a 2x4, which I think they do, or I hope they do. Um, it's more of like a challenge of if I can pull away from that reference, which is I think even more distinct than the rope reference.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I like to, maybe you do this too, like set myself up with problems that I try and solve. Not all the time, but hopefully most of the time.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to me. I've done a lot of paintings that were kind of target formats, but creating a break or disruption in them, also very literally. But there's or sometimes using two stretchers and putting together in a diptych form, but
Yeah.
kind of bringing together this tension between two kind of opposing pieces, or even spatially in a painting. I think that's something I'm really working on creating. And yeah, do you want to continue with a question, or I could
Oh
continue?
yeah, I can definitely do that. On my notes. Yeah, so the next question I had for Pam was how she's approaching color, and I see these as like very euphoric. That's my immediate but then kind of long-standing reaction. And I'm curious why that sort of palette decision, if it's like intentionally appealing or if you're trying to break some sort of logic because you speak about logic often in your like written statements. Are these purely reflective of your outside environs or your interior spaces, as you've mentioned, or is it something else? So this painting that Philip pulled up is one that I was thinking about when I asked Pam about this, where I see this kind of plethora of color palette associations, but just kind of curious where it's coming from for you, Pam.
Well, back to kind of looking out windows, and I did a series of watercolor paintings on paper that I titled Sunsets Over Echo Park. And I have west-facing windows, and I decided to kind of make a series of paintings based on these color samples of our memory of these chance kind of collections of colors and gradations and the way light works in the sky. And so I guess this painting in some ways is related to those ideas, but I also don't try to depict really directly skies or landscapes, but I really feel that they kind of come in as this sort of peripheral vision in a way. But I'm also kind of interested in thinking about how light works. And I didn't mention this before in a conversation we had, but I remember seeing this amazing show at the Getty that was, I think, called The Art of Alchemy, but it had these amazing books and just, I don't know, experiments and kind of understanding how light, how we understand light and how we might understand how a prism breaks apart white light into these spectral colors. And so, but I really loved like the imagining of that, how that works, where there wasn't this clear kind of scientific understanding of that at the time. So in some ways, I think that's where, these paintings are kind of inspired by thinking about that too. And I end up having an idea for them, but then they layer and they change, and the layers do different things depending on what's underneath. And there's a lot of kind of shiny and matte areas in the paintings, and so they sometimes metallic paints, so they really change a lot as you kind of walk by them and observe them from different points of view, get closer, they sort of, things reveal themselves. And I like that kind of active moving. And we can talk more about sculpture and how we think about that too. But for me, and one fun thing about our show together at Phillips a couple of years ago is just that activity of kind of moving around your space, your work, and the three-dimensionality of that. And then also that encourages like a way of viewing paintings that I really like. And so I think we both like really experiment with how color can move you around in a painting, or direct kind of pictorial associations or not. But again, I'll just ad lib my color question for you. I am interested in how you use that, and I think I asked you a little bit already, but if you have other ways you'd like to talk about that too, I'd be curious too.
Yeah, I definitely can. Before I start, I hadn't thought of your circular format as instead of like a literal window, but that kind of like conical reflection within the eye, and trying to comprehend all that visual information as creating this abstract space. That's really nice. Sorry, I just hadn't thought of that before. But yeah, in terms of color, how do I use color? I actually approach it from like a few various ways, and I think this is because I'm interested in the relationship of like these things as objects and these things as paintings and actually drawings as well. So I approach them in different ways. The first, and I think I'm glad you picked this image, Philip, because I'm like, which one will help illustrate this best? And this one kind of combines almost all these aspects. So like Philip has brought up, these are cast aluminum pieces. So we're just looking at a solid metal piece here, but it has like a 2-inch relief surface. And then I'll approach it in a few ways. One way is illusory backdrops, which I try and create through like faded grayscales, or these really vibrant fades that also reference like saturated sunsets of Southern California that just got embedded in me from living there. But I like using these illusionistic spaces because I think they mess with the trompe-l'oeil effect of what's going on with the surface. And trompe-l'oeil is another aspect that I'm kind of pulling out in these works. Trompe-l'oeil is the painted illusion that can trick the eye into thinking they're perceiving a three-dimensional object. So that's kind of like a reverse way of thinking for me, because I'm actually painting a three-dimensional object. But I've found that a lot of people have a hard time kind of comprehending that they're looking at a three-dimensional object, or that they're looking at just metal. And it wasn't like purposeful. I wasn't trying to trick people with this. But as a result of hearing that so much, I'm like, oh, I should push this aspect more, because it's kind of a weird area that wasn't my intention. So I started getting more interested in like simultaneous contrast and certain color relationships that could kind of vibrate those flat surfaces and those three-dimensional surfaces. And another way I like to address color is just pulling out like the literal ropeness of the rope, or like the boardness of the board, meaning sometimes I'll just paint the ropes as like stark white, or in this detail shot Philip has up, this is just the cast metal itself, so really showing the rope as a cast thing. Or if you show another image, Philip, at the bottom of that board, where it's just like a ton of color, I'll like literally use these in the studio as palettes while I'm working on a bunch of other paintings. So it just seems like a literal use of the board. And then the last way is that I'll just get lost with the surface, meaning I'll just start following lines, and suddenly I'm like working on this other aspect of the painting, or the ropes will have these little like areas that seem like small paintings that I'll start making these like smaller paintings within the paintings within. So it's like a weird combination of illusory backdrops and trompe-l'oeil and literalness of the reference, and then just myself getting lost in this low relief surface of the board itself. So it's a few different ways.
I love that you use them as palettes. I think that's so
it's really impractical, but it really is. My other palettes are huge boards that are also impractical. I feel like I should just get like a proper palette. But I think it's fun to see how palettes could become these other compositional like base layers.
Yeah, I love that it just, that whole process is just embedded in what kind of becomes the final piece too, like how you might involve just a chance kind of operation in there too.
Yeah, definitely is like susceptible to that, which is nice.
Yeah.
It's all being controlled. The last thing that Pam and I just decided we should like close upon just for our own questions is just through our conversation, we were realizing, there's a lot of crossover between sculpture and painting between us, and that we should just bring up anything in that regard that might, add to the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for, it's always kind of a challenge for me as, a person that really is mostly involved in painting, to find ways to talk about these as sculptural, which they are, and they have, a lot to do with kind of the depth of the stretcher frame, which maybe we don't have a picture of, but that's okay. But they're like about 2 inches off the wall, and sometimes I'm usually working flat on the paintings as they begin, and so the paint pours over the sides, and so there's a real kind of importance of the whole piece, not just that flat illusionistic surface or flatness of the surface. It's about the dimension, and they often, on the wall, it's thinking about the scale, or there's a few people, they, they interact with the space. So that the negative space is created on walls when they're hanging in a show or in relation to other pieces is always really important to me. If I can control that, it's amazing if there's a nice interaction between what's going on in a space or between other pieces. So that's always really fun in terms of showing them. And the scale is important, which is something that gets lost on digital images or looking at things online. But that kind of physicality in the space is really important to me. And these pieces in the show recently were all circular, but I have been working on these kind of odd eccentric shapes, and more recently these diptychs. And I'm really interested in putting these two pieces together. I'm often working on them separately, and then once I kind of hang them back on the wall, these surprising kind of things happen in the interaction between the pieces. So that's a way that I'm thinking about them more physically and spatially, and relating to kind of dimension in another way. I've never actually done a freestanding piece. I'm really excited and interested about your your new directions with more physical standing in the room pieces. But in our show together, also at Phillips, there one freestanding piece that was really amazing to see it change as you kind of walked around it and see it in profile versus kind of a straight on view. So that added another kind of really fascinating dimensionality to the piece that I thought was wonderful.
I think with this piece also, you can see the brush direction very clearly, or the port.
Yeah.
And there's this sense that there's an immediate response to the support itself, which of course makes it feel very gestural and very physical, and plays also off that sense of pictorial space that one sees in your work and also Katy's. I mean, there's been some really fun moments listening to you both talk and to think about how both you work, and then of course you also, Katy, for example. I just was really enjoying your comment about how the metal is actually the raw metal, but then there's this hilarious moment where you played it off of painted metal, and then of course all these different layers that are in here. I think that's about it for today. I didn't know if there were questions in the chat that people wanted to address, or if you had more things that you wanted to say before we go. We've got a couple minutes here left.
Yeah, no, I think if there's any questions or if there's anything you'd like to ask us, Philip,
I don't have any questions, in the sense that I feel like, through these conversations, we've had such a great chance to talk and about the work and learn about each other's work. I think that that's been this amazing part of COVID as we kind of come out of it. I mean, it's been such a struggle, and I think politically, obviously, this has been a really intense time. But as we start to kind of put ourselves back together, as it were, I think we have learned a lot of things about our own interiority in this time. And of course, as artists, that's one thing that I think artists do, is show people what it means to be a person and experience emotions and seeing and thinking about those things through, in some sense, by proxy, the artist's own position in society, or how they, how their works operate, or the experiences we take from them. So I don't know if I have any direct questions, but I certainly thank you guys for being in my art world during COVID. It's been really amazing. So, it's just really a pleasure to work with you both. And I'm really excited about upcoming projects, and of course at the gallery. Katy, of course, has a show right now, a document in Chicago, that includes the piece that you saw. It's a really great show.
Oh, thanks.
And, Pam is working on an exhibition for Romer Young in the fall. That's really exciting. And of course, we're doing also our own online shows and different projects here at the gallery. So there's lots of ways for you to learn more about the work. If you have questions or want to talk about anything, just send me an email. Did you guys have anything left before we sign off or anything like that?
I don't think so. Always lots to talk about, but I think that's all. What about you, Katie? Did you have?
I'm curious, just because there's a couple of minutes, if your work is changing right now, past like the work you've been doing all year, if you're changing focus, what you're
Um,
working on.
well, I don't know. I guess I'm just beginning on a show for this fall, and I'm working on some diptychs, like I mentioned, but some really strange ones. And Romer Young Gallery is a little smaller and kind of easy to play with the spaces between the paintings. So I've really designed a group of shapes that I think are going to have an interesting interaction with each other. But I kind of often come up with those shapes maybe in a similar way, where you kind of start with this metal support and then the painting is for me like very exciting and often kind of a mystery as to how it's going to evolve for me. But I'm excited about kind of figuring out how to work with these new shapes.
Cool.
And what about you?
Yeah, I'm just trying to make some freestanding pieces over here, so I'm excited to see how they turn out. It's been like a fun challenge.
Yeah, Katie's working on a new circular piece, Pam, and
It's
Katie,
like,
Pam's working on a giant freestanding painting sculpture. Okay, guys, it's been super fun talking with you guys together. It's such a pleasure to
Thank
yeah,
you.
time. And thank you everybody for that came. And we actually have another webinar next week because we're doing an online show with Jackie Gendel that I'm super excited about. And
oh
that's
cool.
I'll be there for talk. So everybody, I hope you guys enjoy your week. And thanks again for joining us. And look forward to seeing you soon. Okay, take care, everybody.
Thank you.